I like to turn pears and apples on the lathe, and I used to do this and just have a stem, but then I found that you could make leaves out of copper, and I think it really adds to the look of the model, so I'm going to show you how I do that from copper pipe. Here are a few examples of that. The pear on the left, the apple on the right. Both of those are turned in cherry. These 3 apples are also turned in cherry. And again, I've got stems on all of them. I use a thicker gauge wire for the stem. Try to flatten the end to make it look kind of real. And then a thinner gauge wire for the part that goes from the stem to the leaf. And here's a leaf just roughed out. And you'll see that they have a great warped kind of a realistic look. I've used in this video a 3/4 inch copper pipe, and I go through the process something like this. I've got just a basic copper pipe cutter. This is just a piece of scrap, 3/4 inch copper pipe. 3/4 inch pipe, honestly, with this tiny cutter kind of maxes the cutter out, but it does seem to get its way around the pipe okay, and so with a few passes that pipe comes loose pretty easily. Once I get that off, I have found that it helps to anneal the copper, to soften it. And so I've read up on this, and I'm not positive I'm doing it right, but if you get it super hot and then quench it in water, it tends to make the copper softer. It's not quite as brittle. It won't tear when you fold it. And it also makes it easier to cut. And so I'm just using tin snips here, and the kind that kind of have leverage, and I just cut through the sides of the pipe and split it apart with pliers. Again, the copper now is fairly soft and pretty easy to move. It's pretty malleable. So I get it like that. I've got a little anvil, which is very handy to have for this kind of thing. I just flatten that copper out to get my shape drawn on it and just get it ready to go to make a leaf out of it. So I just make a flat piece of copper. Then I just simply bisect it with a line, a straight line. This will become the fold. This will become the crease in the leaf. Then I look for something that's got a radius that is, or a diameter that is the length of that line, and draw on each side of that center line in order that I will have similar shapes. When the leaf is folded, it'll look as though you cut it already folded, even though you're cutting it as a single thickness, because it would be really, really difficult to cut in double thickness. So these same shears work pretty good for this. You can just kind of whittle your way around the perimeter of that line, and I'm just cutting to that center line on both sides, and that center line will become the place where I fold the leaf. Here I'm just using a flat bar. I put that center line up against the edge of the bar, tighten it down in a vise, and just use this as sort of a homemade break to get a nice crease in that leaf, which will later become kind of your center crease in the leaf. And so it's pretty important. You want to get this crease well creased, a nice definite line. And you'll see why that's important in a minute. Then I kind of flatten it out a little bit on the vise, just get it flat enough to where I can take it back to the anvil and pound it flat. Now once you've done this, you can see that that scribed line, that folded line, is straight. It's a straight line. Put a straight edge up to it, it's a straight line. But watch what happens now as you start to hit around the edges. What I'm using here is an old roofing hammer. Anything that would have a sharp line on it, a roofing hammer works great. You could do this with a cold chisel and a hammer. And as you beat your way around the perimeter, the round edge, what is starting to happen to the copper is you're stretching. You're stretching the round edge, and you're going to see that that folded edge starts to get warped. And it starts to bend because the rounded edge is getting longer where the folded edge is the original size, and pretty soon you've got this warped line that when you pry the leaf back open, you get this really nice, natural-looking curve to the back side of the leaf, which is how real leaves look. They have a warped look. So I just use the edge of the anvil to slowly open that up, and you can see the curve is even getting more pronounced as you pound on it, because again you've sort of stretched the outside edges and the inside doesn't know where to go, so it starts to warp. And it really is the look you want, is that warped look. And you can see that this is already looking very much like a leaf. What I tend to do then is, once I've got it to where I like it, I will get it hot again in order to, what I'm trying to do honestly is just discolor it. I want to speed up the aging process so that it just looks older and a little more cool. You can also cause oxidation to happen on this to where it'll turn green with different chemicals. I think vinegar might be one, but I tend to like the looks of just the way it gets discolored when you get it hot. And so I heat it up one last time, cool it off in the sink, just like I did before. It cools off almost instantly in cold water. And then I go to get ready to solder a thin stem to it. So what I do here, also those edges where you've cut are a little bit rough and jagged, a little bit of burr on that. So I just take a little emery paper and smooth out that outside edge so it's not uncomfortable to touch the edges of it. Now that crease is where the wire is going to sit. You can see I'm trying it there. Sometimes that crease is a little too pinched, and so you, here I'm just stripping some ground wire to get a piece of bare copper, some skinny bare copper. And that crease can be a little tight for the wire, and you want that wire to just settle down into that crease and look kind of natural. You can see I'm trying it here, and sometimes you have to maybe take a screwdriver or a nail on its side, a piece of steel, and kind of pound it down into that crease in order to get it to accept the diameter of the wire that you're going to use as a stem. Once you've got that and you're happy with it, it's just a matter of soldering it. I'm not the world's greatest solderer, but once you can get that to kind of rest in there and sit still long enough for you to get some solder on it, it solders up really nice and really easy because it's copper, and it lends itself to soldering. So I just use a propane or a butane torch to do all the heating that you've been seeing me do, and also to use for the soldering. Here I'm actually even flattening the wire just a little bit by hitting it with the hammer in order to get it to snuggle down into that crease. So I'll fire up the torch, I've got the wire just resting right where it needs to be, get it hot, and I find that if you heat the underside of the leaf and then put the solder on it, it will actually draw the solder down into that crevice, and honestly that's all it takes. And they hold on remarkably well, and I think they look kind of realistic. Cool it off again in the water, and this is just the little piece of stem that is holding the leaf. Now I want the main stem, which is just a thicker gauge copper wire, and if you'll notice when you break a stem off, if you're taking a piece of fruit off the tree, the stem tends to kind of peel and flatten on the end, and I've just found over time the little stem part coming out of the piece of fruit looks more realistic if you flatten the edge, the end of it. And again, on the anvil it's pretty simple with a ball peen hammer. I just beat on it with the ball side or the hammer side until I kind of like the way it looks. And it'll age nicely over time. Put a little bit of a bend on it so it looks realistic. They're never dead straight as they're coming out of a piece of fruit. So I just put a little bend on that, and then I will take the stem from the leaf and solder it to the stem for the piece of fruit. Again, another really pro solder job here, but again, it only takes a touch of solder to hold that wire together. And that's pretty much it. You turn your piece of fruit, drill a hole in the top to accept that thicker gauge wire as your stem, and I think it takes just what would be a round turning, a pear or an apple, and turns it into kind of a little piece of artwork. So here it is, the finished stem, the finished little stem for the leaf. Again, you cut that off to the length you want once you've turned your piece, and you can conform that little skinny stem to fit the pear or the apple so that it has more of a natural look. And I think it really makes for kind of a nice little shop project that looks pretty realistic and pretty cool. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please subscribe, and thank you for watching.